we snuck behind some sort of prohibited area and got somebody to take our picture and act kind of wacky, and it's partially true. So this was my wedding in an old theater. We weren't dressed up, obviously, and we did steal a rope here to kind of have it in the picture. But I like this photo because I think it does a good job of representing how my family functions as a group. So our personality is a sense of humor, very confident, not easily embarrassed, obviously. And we act this way as a group, despite the fact that as individuals, we are very different. My mom and my brother-in-law, that's my mom, that's my brother-in-law, not terribly silly people, pretty serious, but when we get together as a group, the behaviors and the interactions of the group overall, the personality, the culture, if you will, influences how we act as individuals. That might be counterintuitive to how we are as individuals.
So this is my family. It's an old picture. But the interesting thing I think about this picture is, while it is true that every family is made up of the individuals, it only takes one. You want to point me out there? That's me. It only takes one disgruntled or misaligned individual to sort of throw off the dynamic. So this was a sort of fancy, I think it was New Year's Eve or something, family dinner. And there I am, my rebellious teenage years with, you can't see the mohawk because I'm wearing a hat. And I am wearing a used men's bathrobe. And it's really my effort of announcing to both my family and the world at the time, I am not one of these people. And I think what it can show is that misalignment, while there is an overall family dynamic, misalignment can really throw off the culture, if you will, of the overall family.
So who wants to own this family? Whose family is this? Who takes responsibility? This is anyone who works within a company or an organization, right? This is the perception that a company or organization wants to portray to the public realm about how their employees are. We're all happy, we're all aligned, thumbs up, we're all in it together, right? But we all know that the reality of working within organizations, working for organizations, is incredibly different, right? We've all seen this meeting. We've all been in these meetings. And that there is dysfunction that exists within companies, not dissimilar than the dysfunction that exists within families. And the metaphor kind of continues, right? So if you think about, I don't know, let's say those micromanagers, maybe, that we've all had or experienced through colleagues. You know, those are those individuals who will not let go of tasks and deliverables of the employees who report to them. They have to oversee everything. And then in turn, those employees feel unempowered, they don't feel like they can own something, and they start to get frustrated. Well, that's not different than an overbearing and overprotective parent who doesn't let their child have any freedom. Over time, that child might become more rebellious because that parent is just completely overbearing on top of what their activities are. Or those individuals that you might have worked with that have been with an organization for years. Those individuals who, whenever there's any word of change that has to happen, they immediately don't want to hear about it. Anything that's different from how they're used to functioning, how they're used to working, even if it's for their betterment or the betterment of the organization, they turn a blind eye to. And that might be, let's say, your grandmother or grandfather. And you know it might be best for them to maybe get some help later on in life, or maybe move to a nursing home, and they don't want to hear it. It's change, and they just don't want to have any part of it. Or then you have leadership within organizations, and you've probably interacted with leaders who just seem so disconnected from the reality of the employees who work under them, what their capabilities are, what they aren't. And disconnected leadership is like those parents who, maybe you have little Timmy. Let's refer to little Timmy. Little Timmy has some anger management issues at school that are now manifesting themselves in academic performance. So starting to get bad grades, and those parents, you know, just like disconnected leadership, kind of say, well, that's not our problem. That's really the school's problem. You know, they should deal with it. And so the question becomes, you know, is this really a problem? Are these disengaged employees really an issue? And the reality is that there's a bottom line impact when you have employees who are frustrated. These issues are kind of funny to laugh about when you think about dysfunction and miscommunication that happens within organizations among employees. But this statistic is actually in the United States alone. So there's a definite bottom line impact when you think about organizations not functioning well. And so some employees, over time, maybe they just get so frustrated they move on from that organization, and that company might just have low retention and they just can't hang on to people, which is in and of itself a problem. But sometimes these employees stay for a while. The dysfunction continues. It starts to kind of spread. Morale starts to become even lower. And eventually these issues might become customer-facing. So, these issues, if these employees continue to feel like they are not empowered, like they aren't valued, like they don't have a role within that family or that organization, it might actually start to have manifestations to the public eye. And right, as service designers, this is blasphemy, right? This is just, you don't want the customer to see the issues behind the scenes. And so the question becomes, what can you do about it? What can you do to start to really get to the heart of these problems? And so let's go back to the metaphor of companies or like families. Well, what do families do when they realize, what is that family who has little Timmy who says, okay, we don't really know what to do about this anymore? Well, they often seek group therapy. They often seek a counselor to help them out and try to actually solve some of these problems with little Timmy. So what are some of the characteristics of a group therapist? If this family wants to try to improve Timmy's academic performance and anger management issues, well, one of the characteristics of a group therapist is that they're neutral. The family understands that these problems might not be something they can solve within their family alone. They might not be able to solve them with the educational system, that they might need a neutral perspective from the outside to help determine what is really at the heart of these issues. And that gets to the second characteristic, which is being problem-solving and systems-oriented. And I know problem-solving, of course, everyone's a problem solver. But what a group therapist is really trying to do is to get to the heart of the issue. So imagine if little Timmy winds up, I don't know, going from getting D's on exams to B's. The group therapist doesn't say, oh, that's fantastic, you're cured, the problem is solved. No, because maybe he gets in a fight the next day. So they haven't gotten to the heart of the issue. What a group therapist wants to do is get to the heart of the issue so that it's sustainable. And they're systems oriented, right? So a group therapist knows that little Timmy's problems aren't just within little Timmy himself or between little Timmy and his other friends at school or enemies. Those problems are bigger and they're part of the family overall, right? Everyone's an influencer when you're thinking about the dynamic of a family or an organization. So they want to understand the interactions, the behaviors, the personality of that family as a whole to really get to the heart of the problem. And the things that a group therapist does are around fostering communication, creating empathy. So what is little Timmy feeling? Why is he feeling that way? What do the parents feel about what he's feeling? Vice versa. And it's about creating commonality and a common goal. So little Timmy's problems with his anger or his academic performance are not just his problems alone. It goes back to everyone in the family needs to take ownership of their role in his problems and therefore the part of the solution. Intangibility, right? We all talk about tangibility a lot in service design. But a group therapist's role is no different. So a group therapist doesn't say, you need to be better at school. You need to stop being angry, right? They don't keep it very ethereal. They give Timmy and his family recommendations between sessions about, here's what I want to see you guys working on between now and the next session. And when you come back, here's how I'm going to know whether or not you work on those things. And that's how they'll get to progress, is if they make it tangible for the family and for Timmy. And a group therapist knows that results are iterative. So the group therapist knows that, let's say over time, Timmy's grades start to go up and go up and go up. Well, they're not going to just be on this trajectory into perpetuity. Eventually he might have some, he might fall back and get a C or get a D and then go back to getting a B and an A. And that's understandable. They have that expectation that progress is going to be a couple steps forward and a couple steps back. But ultimately, if a group therapist does his or her job well, they become moot. They actually become somebody that no longer should interact with that family that much, because the recommendations and the solutions, the behavior change that group therapist is working on with that family should become part of that family's dynamic and sustainable on its own. And so eventually that group therapist could move on to another family that is dysfunctional. So referral is basically the name of the game. But ultimately you want those families to internalize the recommendations so much that they become part of the fabric of how that family operates on its own. So hopefully as I'm going through this, you guys start to think that this sounds familiar to service design, right? So I don't know if you noticed on the left side, all the graphics change. It's really, really sassy right there. But this, right, I mean, we just saw with the presentation before, these methods, these co-creation methods, that the role of a service designer is not terribly different from that of a group therapist. Often, a service designer might be portraying a neutral perspective on the situation. So it's often an outsider's view to be able to solve the situations among the constituents, the customers and the employees. Service designers are problem and systems oriented, right? We know services are holistic. You have to think about all the elements that go into the service. It's the technology, it's the processes, it's the time, it's obviously the people, it's the objects. All of the things need to be thought about holistically. Methods that we use are about, co-creation, participatory. It's about fostering communication, creating empathy between customers and employees. It's about creating that common service goal, right? Everyone's aligned with what needs to be accomplished within the service. And it's about making it tangible, right? Services are ethereal, so it's about making them more concrete. And we know as service designers that results are iterative. You're not just magically flip a switch and roll out a new service, and it's just going to be operating and functioning 100%. And that eventually that service should become the new model, a new way of doing business for that organization, and it becomes sustainable and self-perpetuating, right? So there's a lot of connections between the two. But in service design, we're usually focusing on the customers and the employees, right? And so that's great, and that's what service design is about. But what about when you go to roll out that new service and that new way of doing business? You need to address all of those sort of dysfunctional issues that are happening within the organization itself to create change that then supports the new service you're trying to roll out. So we have some work that we're going to present, and I'm going to hand it over to Lisa.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right. We were brought in by the HR group of a huge global telecommunications company. And they were having some issues. And they were the issues that terrify anybody who's trying to do service design. The primary issue was they were getting negative customer satisfaction results based on interactions with the customer service center. So that sort of raised the red flag of our customers are not happy. But then what happened is the HR group rolled out a huge employee survey, and as we often see is the case, the employee satisfaction rates were very, very low. So we had unhappy employees leading to unhappy customers. We see that all the time. So they brought us in to figure out what is going on and how to fix it. How do we fix this, because clearly it's becoming a problem. We started out with just looking through all of the survey data. And most importantly for us, because we really felt the crux of the issue was to start with the employees, we looked at that employee satisfaction survey, and we found some interesting things about the culture of this customer service call center. There were a lot of issues. It was like a dysfunctional family. There was a lot of issues between the customer service reps and their supervisors. There was a general lack of trust in leadership. There was a lack of understanding of, I don't know what my goals are versus my boss's goals. And a lot of things that you see in a dysfunctional family where you have, not everybody moving in the same direction, not everybody having the same desires, not everybody having the same idea of who you're really supposed to be. So we decided that it was time for some therapy, that we would apply some therapeutic methods, especially around the group therapy. So a lot of the employee satisfaction survey was really indicating a lot of conflict between the supervisors and the technicians. So we went in and decided we were going to get these guys together, and we were going to help them work on this. And I think it's important to note here that the HR group is the one who initially engaged with us. Now, typically, some organizations, you could do this internally. So HR might have been able to, employ some of these methods. But the essential thing there was that first point that Laura made about neutrality. HR in some organizations might be perceived as neutral, but there were some specific things within the employee satisfaction survey that indicated that HR was not necessarily trusted. So that's when HR said, we need outside help. We need to bring people from the outside in. So, you know, let's change the culture. Well, you shouldn't start trying to change a culture and address employee issues until you figure out what are you changing it to. So to just go in and say, people are unhappy, now we need to make them happy, you gotta figure out what is happy, what does that look like, what does good look like? So you start out by asking the question, what do you want to be? Now anybody who does, especially any sort of innovation design, you can't ask people, oh, what do you want? You know, if you would ask people, you know, do you want this iPod? They'd be like, I don't even understand what this is. You have to elicit it from them in other ways. So you can't ask a dysfunctional person, what does healthy look like? They're too caught up in their dysfunction. So we went through a series of exercises where we got the supervisors and the customer service reps together in the room. And we asked them, you know, so these people are at odds. If you get them together in a room and say, what's the problem? You're going to have one of two things happen, right? They're either going to fight and you're going to have people throwing chairs, or they're going to clam up, right? They're not going to want to, you don't want to, you get somebody in the room and be like, okay, tell your father why you're angry. They clam up. So we took it away from the problem and we asked them questions of what are the ideal traits of a customer service rep? So what makes, in your opinion, what makes the customer service rep good? You don't talk about anybody in this room, talk about this ideal state. And, you know, we did, you know, some adjective and metaphor elicitation exercises. You know, a lot of this should look very familiar to those of us, especially tag clouds, the ubiquitous tag cloud, because we were doing those exercises where we gave them adjectives and asked them to describe. We did the same thing with, you know, what is the ideal supervisor? And they would say things like empowering, or trustworthy, or trustful, and we would start to get all these adjectives together. But we didn't want to forget there's interactions between people, but then there's that group personality, and the workplace environment is a player in all of this. So we asked for that, what is the ideal environment? Is it a supportive environment? Is it an organized environment? What's the ideal? And we, so we ended up with a couple of things. So we ended up with these series of adjectives here. And what was interesting is that we did night shift, we got night shift together, then we did the day shift, they had a 911 service, we got them together. But what was really interesting, I felt, was all of these different groups, all of these different people, supervisors and techs at odds with each other, they kind of had the same idea about what good looked like. You know, there were maybe slightly different words, but you know, they wanted collaborative. These people said open communication. That's, you know, sort of, there's a lot of similarities there. Professional, a couple of times that came up in different groups. So, you know, you look at that and you have all of these people and they all have the same idea of what good looks like. So, and you know, that begs the question, why are you not there? You know, because a lot of times part of the problem with misalignment in a workplace culture is everybody wants something different, but these guys all wanted to be the same thing. This was all aligning with who they wanted to be. So we had to go in and figure out, do a root cause analysis to figure out why. If you want this to be supportive, why isn't it? And again, taking it away from the personal and more sort of backing out, we started with the workplace environment. And we looked at, you know, what's not happening. And we took our tag clouds and we just went one by one. And, you know, you ask the first question. So, empowering. You want to ask the question, is the current work, so you say empowering is ideal. Is your current workplace empowering? No. So why not? So then, you know, that you'd have the rep saying something like, well, you know, because my boss is always yelling at me, he's a jerk. And I know I'm trying to clear a call queue and I can't because he's yelling at me. Okay, well, that's not the root cause, right? The boss isn't, you know, he probably didn't wake up in the morning thinking, I'm going to make somebody's day miserable. The boss is there at the table and he's like, well, yeah, but you got to understand, I'm being held accountable for you to clear all of the, so this company did cable, they do cable, internet, and phone. Well, so what we learned in this root cause analysis is the customer service rep was responsible for clearing a queue that included cable, internet, and phone. So somebody could be calling with a problem, could be any one of those things. But the managers were each under a vertical. So the phone manager was being held to how quickly do you clear the phone queue, the internet guy was how quickly have you cleared the internet queue. So what was happening is the rep's thinking, I'm going to handle these 5 phone things in a queue first because they're going to be fast, and then I'm going to move on to the internet because I know it's slow. Meanwhile, somebody's yelling at them going, clear the phone queue, because that person's being held to different metrics. They didn't realize that that's what was causing this, and there was sort of a little bit of a revelation. So, after we went through and found what the root cause was, well, then you have to start thinking, what are the solutions? And not just what are the solutions. So you definitely want to come up with a roadmap. That's a huge part of what we do as service designers, right? You have this roadmap of, you know what the service should be, you've identified some of the barriers. But if you just have this sort of, it's the tangibility that Laura talked about, if you just have this ethereal idea that, oh, well, you just need to be nicer people and you just need to change the metrics or whatever, but you don't give people a clear idea of what am I doing differently tomorrow than I'm doing today, it's never going to get there. So if you go back to the therapy metaphor, if you think about a lot of recovery programs, they're in steps, and there's always a first step, and the first step is not stop getting into fights, or the first step isn't be more engaged in your job. The first step has to be really tangible, and it has to be something real that you can do tomorrow. So we did a series of prioritization exercises. And we basically went through and we did a couple of things. So one is we looked at the barriers. So some of the issues around metrics, et cetera, that they came up with. And we asked them to prioritize what are the 5 that will sink you? What are the 5 that if you don't solve them, you're never going to get to where you want to go? And along with that, prioritize these in terms of which ones are going to be ones that we think we actually could solve within the next month or 2, that it should be pretty easy, and which ones are going to require a lot more work or a lot more effort. And there were a lot of different things in here. And some things were, outside of the behavior, right? So some things were around a knowledge sharing system. So if somebody was able to solve a problem, they could put it up in the knowledge sharing system. But a lot of it was, basics of interaction. And we had them sort of prioritize. And then we did, so we looked at the things, obviously, that were essential to fix and fairly easy. There's your first step. So, the one that I found was interesting was around communications. We learned that supervisors never left their office unless somebody was in trouble. So it was literally the second the door opened, they were like, oh my God. So we had to tell them, go walk the halls. Walk the halls and ask people, how are you doing? Not what are you doing, how you doing? So after we got to that first step, we had to figure out how to carry it forward. So we had the 50 or 60 people that were involved with us. They were on board and they were moving in the right direction, and they were about to go back to work with 500 people who had no idea what they were talking about. And you can't go in and be like, we're doing this, and you have to bring everybody on that same journey. So we got volunteers from this group to be ambassadors. And anybody who does change management knows you get change ambassadors. But we armed them with the toolkit because we realized that the journey that we had taken them on in this, this therapy that we did, everybody needed to come on this journey, and it wasn't sustainable for us to come in and then do this with 500 people. So we armed them with tools that empowered them to go through those same exercises that we went through with them. And what they did is the first 10 minutes of every team meeting, when they broke up to little teams, first 10 minutes of every meeting, they'd run through an exercise and look at what are our key attributes, what's the barriers, what's stopping us, so that they were able to perpetuate that forward, so that the momentum spread from the ground up, because this isn't something that comes from the top down. It's who you are as a group. It comes from the bottom up.
So then the question becomes, not just how do we carry this forward within the project that Lisa just articulated, but how do we, as the service design community, carry this forward? And so I think what's interesting is that Lisa didn't talk about customer journey maps or service blueprints or any of the typical kind of methods and deliverables that you do within service design, because those are very important for articulating and visualizing, communicating the service design. But those things are not tantamount to the change within the organization that you need to have happen in order to deliver on that service design. So with organizational change, it's a little bit different, and that's what Lisa articulated. So with service design, you can have metrics for getting the whole service to operate where the wait time is under 2 minutes. But with organizational change, the metrics are even a little bit less tangible, right? How do you measure whether or not an employee feels empowered? So how do you measure whether or not they feel valued within an organization and feel part of that organization? With service design, you're visualizing all the constituents and the processes, right? All the things I listed earlier. But with organizational change, you're visualizing communications and interactions between people. So in many ways, the work of organizational change is even less concrete, even more nebulous, even less tangible than that of service design. But I think that's why we felt this topic was important to communicate to you guys, because we feel that the things that you need to do to create change within an organization, to fulfill upon that service design, is just ripe for the service design community to actually be able to carry that forward.